Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man? They say murder three. Strange things that happen here. No stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree.
Coffee. Without it, we would never have had the Industrial Revolution. We'd all be still living in Europe in mud huts. Here in Laredo, we have the Organic Man Coffee Trike. 4501 McPherson, the best coffee on the planet. If you can't get to Laredo, you can order from the Organic Man Coffee Trike.shop. Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Chris James. I forgot to unplug the phone, and somebody was going to call wanting to talk to me about my vehicle warranty. I've been removing a bunch of old shows from Podomatic. My storage space is just about out. Used to be easy to clear up space. I would go to the episode I wanted to delete. I'd hit the delete button. I'd hit the you're sure this is what you want to do button, and it'd be gone. And all of a sudden I'd have storage space again. Well, that was the old way of doing things. Of course, the IT guys, they've got to fix things that aren't broken. So they changed it. Now I have to go to Manage Episodes. And then I have to click on the last page. Then I have to scroll down to the episode I want to delete. And I have to click on the delete button. Then I have to click on another delete button to remove it from the storage space. Then I have to click on a button that says, yes, I'm sure that's what I want to do. It went from a couple of minutes to clear up space to I've been working on this all week, and boy, is it annoying. Of course, I asked the people at Podomatic why they did that, and it's like, oh, yeah, we improved things. Duh. Well, it's kind of like every time they update your computer, and then you spend the next month trying to figure out how to use it. So, if you listen on Podomatic or any of the other affiliates, the channels that they use, like Spotify, Audacity, Boomplay, things like that, and you want to listen to the archives, but you can't find the older shows, try some of the iHeartRadio podcast platforms. Castbox, Deezer, Podcast Addict, places like that. You can still find it on Apple Podcast and Google Play, I believe, or is it Google Podcast? It's just that if you're trying to find the older shows and you just can't locate them, that's why. I'm not going to pay several $100s a year just for storage. We're talking something like $500-600, I think it is. I got better things to spend my money on, like food and gas and the cats. So, speaking of the cats, I've ejected them all from the studio. They're all sitting at the door, scratching on it, trying to get in. They know there's something going on in here that they're not a part of, and they don't like that. So, too bad, so sad. So, like I said, if you're trying to listen to the old shows, you can still find everything on YouTube. Late at night, our neighbor's dog, Prince, has been known to bark once in a while. He gets upset by anybody walking along the sidewalk, and especially if they look suspicious. If I'm walking my dog and he growls or barks at somebody, I keep an eye on that person. Because I figure if my dog doesn't trust them, well, there's a reason. A funny thing is, whenever we're at the park and the maintenance crew is there working on something, she just wags her tail and looks at them. She doesn't bark at any of the guys working for the city. She never barks at the garbage people either. But she does bark at some of my neighbors, so it's Anyway, so if late at night I hear barking, I just figure, okay, Prince is keeping the bad guys away. Well, now George, our new dog, the one that had distemper, but apparently he survived, well, he's decided that he has a voice. And the gate to our backyard just happens to be right next to our window. And he'll bark a couple of times, and then he'll go back to his doghouse and go to sleep. That's just life. If something is barking at something else, it kind of makes me wonder why. It's something you learn to live with if you live in a city or a town. Now, crying kids, oh, that's a whole different beast. For some odd reason, parents will take their kids to the grocery store and they'll sit there and scream and cry the whole time they're there. Other kids will think, ooh, that sounds fun, and they'll join in. It's kind of like stereo. You got one to the right, you got one to the left, and they're both screaming and crying because they didn't get whatever it was they wanted. I don't like that. In fact, it will make me go to the other end of the grocery store. When we go to the restaurant, I'll ask the waitress, can you seat us somewhere where there aren't any kids? Usually it works, but sometimes it doesn't. If you hear a crying kid late at night, this is a whole other thing. It makes you wonder, is there some kind of an emergency? Has the kid had an accident and the parents are not there to fix the problem? Maybe they decided to leave the small child at home alone, which has happened. If you're dealing with a sick kid, let's say in the back of an ambulance, a crying kid was actually a good thing. You knew they had an open airway and they were breathing. It's when they were quiet that you'd get nervous. If you live out on a ranch or a farm, or maybe just out in the country, the sound of a crying kid at night can be a very bad thing. Man, I've lost my spot. Just thinking about crying kids, you see what it does? It drives my brain into neutral. It can be a bad thing. The sound will result usually in an automatic response in most folks, which will cause them to go looking for the cause of the distress. Why is this kid crying out in the middle of nowhere? Almost always when lost, children tend to stay in one place. They'll sit down and wait. This makes finding them a lot easier than adults who will keep wandering around until they fall over exhausted. Now, on occasion, kids have wandered off and kept moving around, but this is the exception. Every S&R class I've ever been to has stated that they will sit down when lost. In the middle of the night, somebody living out there in the country has heard the sound of a child crying. Thinking there's some kind of an emergency, the adult has set out to find the problem. As they walk towards the sound, they seem to be getting farther away. Once you begin the search, it's nearly impossible to stop. They've stated as they walked towards the sound of distress, it was as if the child was moving farther away, always staying just out of sight. If you've never walked through the brush at night, it only takes a short time to get completely turned around as to where you are. Unless you know how to navigate by the stars or you can recognize things around you, it might just lead to your becoming lost. The only reason we know about sounds moving away as the searcher was looking is they gave up before becoming hopelessly lost. They returned home with only confusion and questions, but still alive. There are a number of creatures out there that are known to mimic the sounds of children crying. Late one night, I was called to a location where a group of aliens had just entered the U.S. Aliens, as in not citizens, not from outer space. Most had been crossed over the river in a boat by a smuggler, but one guy had decided he was going to swim. Well, it was a cold night, like close to freezing. The man was soaked and shivering uncontrollably. The first thing you have to do is get the wet clothes off. Well, I was the medic, so it fell to my shoulders to take care of this guy. I did what I had to do. I got the wet stuff off and I got him wrapped in a dry, warm blanket, and then I put him in the back of a unit with the heater on full blast. After a few minutes, he was good to go. Just had to find him some dry clothes. As we're about to leave, one of the other aliens said they thought somebody was in trouble. They had heard a small child crying. We left one or two agents with the prisoners and we went to have a look. Now, I never heard anything. One of the guys in our group swore that he could hear a child crying in the brush to our south. Now, in southern Laredo, the river goes north and south, so us moving south, we're still in the United States. We followed the agent who said he could hear something. We walked for about 15 minutes, still only him being able to hear. And he swore that there's a child crying just over there in the brush. After about 15 minutes, we kind of formed up in a group and we said, nah, there's nothing out here. You're hearing things. It's time to get back to the vehicles. All the way back, he kept saying that he had heard this child crying. And like I said, I never heard a thing. As a group, we were able to figure out that it was a wild goose chase. Had it been just one or two guys, they would have wound up either walking all the way to Zapata County, or just maybe they'd never be seen again. What was that guy hearing, and why were none of the rest of us able to hear it? The lyrebird in Australia creates what sounds like a baby crying almost perfectly. You'd swear that's what you're hearing. Now, we don't have these in Laredo, but we do have a lot of parrots. Many birds can mimic human sounds, but they don't move away while enticing people to follow them. One possibility talked about here on the southern border is the owl woman. La Lechuza is a woman who met with a nasty death. Way back when, a small town was experiencing a run of bad luck. The local herbalist, who was thought to be a bruja or a witch, she was the crazy old lady, probably had a bunch of cats, lived off by herself. Well, the locals began to think that it was all her fault. Fearing there was supernatural powers at hand, the town folks decided to kill her to stop whatever was going on. The woman was either hung or set on fire, depending on which story you read. Either way, she was wrongfully killed. Or was she? The story goes that she met up with the devil and made a deal with him. He was going to let her return to Earth to seek her vengeance. And then she would send fresh souls his way. Seeing as it was the men who had murdered her, she began focusing only on them. The woman came back as a 7-foot-tall owl with a 15-foot wingspan. She retained her human face. One by one, she lured the men away from town, and none of these men were ever found, not even their bodies. Having fulfilled her deal, the owl woman went out looking for more men to kill. She was now doing this for unknown reasons. Now, I have talked to a few people, all men, who swore they saw a giant owl with a human face. La Lechuza didn't go after them. allowing them to survive to tell their story. It's impossible to say why she targets some and not others. The naysayers will wave their arms in the air, yelling, "There's no such thing." There are some people out there who will try to convince us that Lee Harvey Oswald killed Kennedy and the ships that were attacked in the Gulf of Tonkin justified the increased military in Vietnam. One of La Lechusa's tricks is to make a sound of a young child crying. Anyone hearing this will naturally go looking. As the searcher begins moving through the brush, the sound will always be just ahead, just a little further. Some of these stories have survived because the person hearing the crying told someone else that they were going to go look for this child. For unknown reasons, this other person didn't go with them. Perhaps they had other things they had to do, or perhaps they were sick and couldn't go out. But the person that went searching for the crying child vanished. No body was ever found. And this has happened enough times to make you wonder what the heck is going on. I have listeners in the Philippines, Malaysia, and Indonesia. I hope I get this information correct. I did a lot of reading, but I'm limited in only having access to what is on my side of the planet. If I make a statement and y'all think that this isn't correct, send me an email. Let me know, and I'll make the correction on the next show. If I mispronounce a name, well, I have a hard time with English as well. The Tianak is described as a hideous, demonic, bloodthirsty child who usually preys on pregnant women or people who are out walking in the woods alone at night. This terrifying creature has inspired a lot of ghost books, ghost stories, and horror movies. Even has been on a few podcasts. The name Tianak is derived from the word mati and anak, which translates to the dead child. Mati, well, that's cut in half, and just the T, anak. A legend from Mindanao suggests that Tianak are the souls of children whose mothers died while giving birth. So the child either dies as well or they grow up alone without any guidance. Demonic forces move in and they turn the child into one of theirs. While various stories have slightly different versions of the Tianak, the stories all agree on its ability to mimic an infant's cry in order to lure victims into the jungle. In some legends, the Tianak may take the form of a child. The most common version, the Tianak, retains the general shape of a baby with sharp claws and fangs that it uses to attack its victims. In another, it shares similarities with dwarves. The true form of the Tianak is that of an old man with wrinkled skin. He has a long beard and a mustache, a flat nose, and very large eyes. A Tianak is relatively immobile because its right leg is shorter than the left. The creature moves by leaping rather than walking, making it difficult to hunt or stalk victims. But its ability to mimic an infant's cry compensates for this disadvantage. In yet another story, it is seen as a flying baby through the forest. And in a legend from Mindoro, it transforms into a black bird before flying away. The Tianak takes the form of a newborn baby and cries like one in the jungle to attract unwary travelers. Once it is picked up by the victim, it reverts to its true form and attacks. The Tianak is also said to take delight in leading travelers astray and abducting children. The original story said the creature was the offspring of a woman who died while giving birth. She fell to the ground, and the baby was born in the dirt. This allowed evil spirits to take control. When the Spanish colonized the Philippines in the 16th century, the Tianak became integrated into Christianity. In the Christian version, Tianaks were the souls of infants that died before being baptized. This description was extended to include aborted fetuses that returned from death to seek revenge on those who had deprived them of life. Both Malaysia and Indonesia have similar legends about women who died during childbirth, creating something called a Pontianak. The Pontianak is a bone-white lady with ruby-red eyes who is formed when a woman dies during childbirth. Some of the people of Malaysia believe that it originated from a stillborn child, or a woman who died giving birth, or maybe a woman who had been killed by another Pontianak, or their spirits have been captured by evil creatures. Pontianak fly about during the nighttime. She looks seductive and beautiful on the outside and would usually smell very nice. Once she lures in her victims, the Pontianak would then turn into something hideous. It sounds a lot like the story of the succubus. It looks like a beautiful woman until it has you, and then it turns into this ugly creature. Babies and women are not safe from the Pontianak either. They are known to eat babies as well and would cause harm to pregnant women that might cause their miscarriage or even death. The Pontianak usually haunts lonely roads or wooded areas. There's often depicted as a long-haired woman dressed in white. Signs that a Pontianak is nearby include the sound of an infant crying and the smell of a decaying corpse. An unsuspecting traveler, usually a man, will see a beautiful young woman walking along one of the trails. If he attempts to talk to her or engage with her, she turns into a hideous creature, attacks, and sucks out all of his blood. One story of a Pontianak sighting comes from an old road in Genting Highlands. This happened before the new road was opened. An older couple were traveling along the road when their vehicle began making odd sounds. The driver pulled over, got out, and opened the hood. He began looking around, trying to find what was the problem. His wife sat in the passenger seat waiting. After about 15 minutes, she saw a motorcycle approaching. It was a police officer. As the officer was pulling over to lend a hand, he suddenly opened the door and insisted the woman get out. He pulled her to his motorcycle, got her on, as well as himself, and then sped away. They flew past the hood of the car, and the wife looked over and saw a woman dressed in long white gown, holding her husband's corpse down and sucking the last of his blood out. The officer later said if the monster had finished before he had arrived, it would have gone after her next. The recording of what is said to be a Pontianak was made in Malaysian newspapers, was reported in Malaysian newspapers. In April 2008, many adventurous people flocked to the historical town of Malacca. People gathered at a bridge near Jalan Palu Gadong, where a 50-second video clip had been filmed. People stood on or near the bridge hoping to catch sight of this vampire woman. The video clip, circulated by mobile phone, shows a woman with long black hair, clad in a white gown, floating in midair while making the sounds of a baby crying. A Wendigo is an evil spirit that can be either a mix of human and animal, or simply an evil spirit that possesses people to make them do its bidding. This spirit has the power to cause people to do acts that involve unspeakable levels of greed, lust, and hunger. I have to ask, Are the stories of the Wendigo all dealing with one being, or are there several all being called by the same name? There are stories of people being taken over after having a dream while sleeping on or near cursed ground. Any place an evil spirit has been dealt with, hopefully in a permanent manner, becomes cursed, and nobody is supposed to go near it. The trouble is, the people who dispatched this evil being, they'll leave a mark or a sign, something to let others know. If you're not from the same tribe or you're not an Indian, feather not dot, you might not recognize this as being a sign to stay away. The spirit itself was usually described as being very tall, 7 or 8 feet tall, sometimes 14 or 15 feet tall. Their bodies are emaciated, even after eating everything in sight. The head is that of a deer skull with antlers. It really depends on which tribe you ask, though. Wendigo do anything that tends to embody wanton hunger, violence, and greed. They have an unending need for human flesh that keeps them on the hunt for people at all times. Whenever you see a lone person, they do everything they can to hunt them down and invite them to dinner. Whenever they see, not you. On occasion, when seen in a group, the Wendigo will enter the minds of any of them who is not on their guard, too tired or too focused on other things, using substances that lower your conscious level. Once this person has been possessed, he or she will go after trying to kill all the other people in the group and then eat them. Even if there is plenty of food around, the possessed person will only go after humans. The Wendigo have a certain level of general malice towards anything human or beneficial to mankind. They are fond of driving people to wanton destruction of the local environment, and they love to encourage famine amongst humanity. Though Wendigo can eat other things, that's not their primary food. They need human flesh in order to survive. If they go too long without killing someone, they're said to die. Now, this is only if a Wendigo can die. Since we don't know what they are, we can't be sure what might become of their spirit. It could just simply go into a kind of a suspended state like the cicada. Sit on the edge of a tree and wait for they sit under the dirt near a tree and they wait for 5 or 7 years and then they pop back up. Wendigo sightings are generally relegated to the northern parts of American Midwest and the southern parts of central Canada. The Cree, Algonquin, and Ojibwe tribe territories are where they are most likely to be encountered. Wendigo are also called ice giants by some tribes. This name comes from their nearly always associated with super cold weather. Some folks believe the Wendigo spirits hibernate during the warmer months. It's believed that the close ties the Wendigos have to cold weather deals with the way that Wendigo came into being. Because most Wendigos start off as humans who resorted to cannibalism to survive the winter famine, the tide of the winter never seems to really leave. Wendigo are either eternal beings that move from person to person, or they're simply humans who have turned to cannibalism, and they become cursed for their actions. Cannibalism is forbidden in some tribes. Others have been known to eat parts of their victims without running the risk of becoming an evil entity. It depends on which tribe you're dealing with. One aspect associated with Wendigo encounters is they make the sound of a child crying in the woods. The folks hearing this are tricked into investigating, thinking there's some poor kid lost out there. As they go trying to rescue this unfortunate, the sound is constantly just a little farther away. Once the person is well away from their home or any others who might help, the Wendigo strikes, taking over the victim's body or simply eating them. The legend of the water baby comes from the Indian folklore of the American West. Taking the form of a human infant, the water baby is a mysterious but deadly spirit that haunts some of the rivers and lakes of traditional tribal lands. It is said that the water baby mimics the cry of a human baby in order to lure unsuspecting humans to their watery death. Sources are scarce, but stories of these spirits persist. The personality of the water baby can vary. Sometimes it is characterized simply as a mischievous creature, but others' depictions are that it's more sinister, more evil. Some tales hold that the water baby is merely a trickster that enjoys teasing and abusing any humans that approach the water's edge. In some legends, water babies are murderers who are seeking revenge for some past wrongs. There are several legends dealing with certain of these beings. According to one legend, there was a terrible famine that overtook the land of the Shoshone tribe that was living in the area. They could not feed themselves, and they sure as the heck couldn't feed any new mouths. Mothers were forced to drown their newborn babies in the local rivers and lakes. It is said that the babies grew tails and fins and gills. They survived the famine by feeding on tadpoles and small fish. Now these spirits are said to be seen playing in the water around the Shoshone Bannock Reservation. Their laughter can be heard as they attempt to lure unsuspecting humans to their death. Utah's water baby legend is different from Idaho's. Their story tells of a Native American mythical creature, kind of like a dwarf. These beasts live in the water of the Utah lakes. They mimic the sound of child's cry to lure humans into the open water. Once there, they drag them down to the bottom where they drowned. Pyramid Lake near Reno, Nevada is a hotbed of these legends. There are two different stories of the water baby's creation. One story holds that the tribe who lived in the region would drown deformed or sickly babies in the lake. The angry spirits of these babies haunted the lake, and they seek their revenge by dragging humans down. The people who are most upset by this, saying, "How could anybody drown a deformed infant?" are the same ones that used to tie people to stakes and set them on fire. In another tale, a man discovers a beautiful woman with the tail of a fish. He brings her back to his tribe to be his wife. Soon the tribe demands that he take her back to where he had found her. I guess they didn't much like a half-human, half-fish living in their village. Rejected, the creature put a curse on the lake. Soon after, a baby was possessed by the water spirit that took the shape of a snake. The baby latched its fangs into its mother and would not release the woman. The medicine man made a deal with the demon, released the mother, and the lake would be their domain forever. A closer relationship, perhaps, to the legend of the water baby is that of the mermaid. Now, the mermaid is supposed to be half human, half fish. Occasionally, stories arise of humans falling in love with mermaids or vice versa. Some stories associate mermaids with storms. The idea of a mermaid would look anything like Ariel is really too much. Any kind of a being living in the ocean or even a lake would need some form of insulation to protect against that super cold water where they live. So instead of looking like a beautiful young woman with a fishtail, try to picture a dugong in a bathing suit. Anyway, if a mermaid is half human, half fish, why do they always have a tail like a whale or a dolphin? Fish tails go up and down. not back and forth across. And mermaids are always shown to have scales. So is it part fish, part human, part mammal? I mean, whale, dolphin? They need to straighten this out. Crying kids drive me nuts. Crying adults, well, they drive me even more nuts. There are some folks who go looking for crying children. Well, they're spirits anyway. A lot of crying spirits are associated with bridges, old bridges that have been around long enough to have acquired a bad reputation. The Crybaby Bridge in Salem, Ohio is one such location. The details of the legend are unclear. The reason a spirit is trapped in the water under the bridge has been linked to several stories. One story says the baby was killed because the father refused to marry the mother, and she was at her wit's end. Back then, single parents were ostracized. She went to the bridge on the road near Egypt Road. She dropped her child into the river and then either killed herself by hanging or maybe some other means. In another version, the mother and child were killed by some unknown person. Some say a family were traveling along the road and they stopped on or near the bridge. They were there for a while, during which their child wandered away from the parents. The couple searched the area and they found their offspring dead, floating under the bridge. The people who go to the bridge late at night hoping to catch the sound of a crying child, sometimes water flowing quickly over rocks can make a sound that your brain will interpret as crying or as whispering. Then again, it could be the spirit is still stuck there playing out its final moments on Earth. If you happen to be in Salem, Ohio, find your way along an unused road leading to an old bridge right off of Egypt Road, let me know if you hear anything. The best way to catch something is you stand perfectly still and then clear your mind. Don't try listening for crying because you're probably going to hear it. You want to clear your mind. Don't think about anything. If you're using a recording device, set it down on something safe, not the handrail, unless you just don't like your phone. Set it down and leave it alone. Don't say anything. Just let the recorder run. Face in one direction for a couple of minutes and listen. If you don't hear anything, try turning. A quarter turn and listen some more. Make another quarter turn, listen some more. People say if you park your car right next to the guardrail and keep your headlights aimed at the bridge, a white fog will form under the bridge and begin to approach your vehicle. So far, nobody has said that they did this and were able to stay in place to see what the white mist was going to do. As soon as they saw the mist begin moving, the witnesses drove off, which is probably the smart thing to do. Don't step past the guardrail. It's off limits. If you get caught, you might get a ticket or even get taken to jail. Some folks say anyone who decides to be adventurous and sneak into the woods anyway may never come back. It is said those who cross the guardrail late at night vanish into some unknown place. The Maud Hughes Bridge is located between Princeton and Milliken Road in Liberty Township. It is also known as the Screaming Bridge. Instead of crossing a river, it crosses a set of railroad tracks. The bridge spans the main line that has had many names since the 1870s. It was originally called the Short Line, and then it was the Big Four, the New York Central, Conrail, Penn Central, and now it's called the Norfolk Southern. No one knows for sure when it first became known as the Screaming Bridge. One of the earliest stories attributed to screaming from the bridge was a train crew were killed while traveling along the tracks over the bridge or under the bridge. The trouble with this story is the deaths actually took place in Westchester Township instead of Liberty. Other stories have come out on what the screams are from. One tells about a couple who were driving over the bridge. Their car broke down and the man went into town to find help. Once he returned with a wrecker driver, they found the woman had been murdered and her body was hung over the side of the bridge. In another tale, an unwed mother was crossing the bridge when she decided to throw her infant over the side. Later on that night, she became overcome by her actions and she returned looking for her baby. See, she searched the area below but was never able to find it. She was driven mad with grief, and the sound of crying are that of her spirit and not the infant. Locals say the bridge has been the site of at least 36 deaths through accidents and suicides. Witnesses have reported apparitions, mists, hooded figures, and strange lights. They also sometimes hear or see a phantom train crossing under the bridge. As far as I could find, there are no safety risks involved other than watching for cars while on the bridge or trains under it. You don't want to become known as the person killed while looking into the screaming bridge. There are far better ways to become famous. Try catching the sounds on a recording so the rest of us can hear them. If you do get killed, well, your spirit just might wind up there at the bridge, screaming for the rest of eternity. The Arlington Screaming Bridge is a place you might hear crying and screaming if you go there at night. One fall night, more than 50 years, I believe it's more like 70 years ago, several teenagers were carpooling home after their high school football team had defeated their opponents. Still pumped up after their team had won against one of their biggest rivals, the kids were not being very responsible. They were driving too fast, not paying attention to the road ahead. Well, they were acting like kids. The bridge running through Arlington's River Legacy Park was just wide enough for one car at a time. As you approached the crossing, you had to look for any vehicle coming from the other side. Whoever arrived first had the right-of-way. You were expected to pull to the right and stop and allow the other vehicle to cross. Being all wound up from the big game and thinking they were going to live forever like most kids, the driver didn't see a car coming from the other direction. To make matters worse, the other car had faulty headlights, so it was hard to see, especially since nobody in the other car was paying any attention. I've seen cars driving around all the time without their headlights. Some are because of mechanical failure, some due to the driver not being all there, drinking or using drugs, and sometimes the driver is just not paying attention. By the time either party realized the imminent disaster, it was too late. The cars collided head-on and erupted into a fiery explosion. Then they were plunged off the side of the bridge into the Trinity River below. Nobody survived the crash. My first vehicle was a 1964 Chevy pickup. It had no seat belts. The gas tank was inside the cab right behind the driver's seat. The dashboard was made out of steel, and the doors opened by a thumb button. If the truck rolled over, the doors would immediately pop open. In a bad accident, there were no safety features. It looked just like the truck Ben Napier drives. The crash site was cleaned up, the bodies taken away for burial. Over time, the bridge was closed to vehicles. People walk out over the water late at night, report hearing the sounds like screaming and crying coming from the darkness. Faint but definite. Looking around, they had to convince themselves that these sounds were not coming from anyone still alive. There was no one anywhere nearby, not even under the bridge. Some people have reported seeing what looks like tombstones just under the water when seen from the middle of the bridge. There was one stone for each of the dead kids. Some witnesses said they could just make out names of those who were killed. In the daylight, there is nothing in the water that could be mistaken for grave markers. The bridge is located in River Legacy Park in Arlington, Texas. Now, there are two bridges in the park, and they're at opposite ends of the place. It looks like it would be easier to park outside and walk in than to park in the parking lot and have to walk all the way across to find these bridges. One is all the way east and one is all the way to the west. If you wind up at the wrong bridge, well, you either have to drive all the way around the park or you have to walk from one end to the other. The easy thing to do is to ask some of the park officials. They say that they will tell you which bridge you want to go to. The problem with any park being in Arlington is it's located between Dallas and Fort Worth. I don't like driving in either of these ridiculously huge conglomerations of cities. If you're following the bag company on Storytime, Pam Bogus will get to drive through Dallas-Fort Worth several times. You'll get to know how much I dislike driving in Dallas. I don't like driving in Dallas, Houston, Austin, El Paso, any of the big cities here in Texas. As for those other big cities, forget it. Chicago, LA, New York, do not want to drive in any of those. And I've driven in several, and nope, not for me. Certain websites like to lay claim to creating creatures. Things like the rake, which was actually been around for hundreds of years. But folks like to pretend they're in control. They say that monsters don't really exist. This makes it easier to sleep at night. A bizarre being with an equally bizarre name is called a fleshgate. A fleshgate is a creature that mimics the voices and the appearances of people in the woods, often with the intent of luring them away. Those who have seen fleshgates in their natural appearance claim they're extremely tall, thin, gray beings with long claws and no hair. They almost sound exactly like a pale crawler or a rake. Reports of people encountering these beings have come from all parts of the world. It's impossible to know when the first encounter might have occurred because people have been vanishing since people even occurred. The people who encounter what is known as a fleshgate said they suddenly thought the group they were in had gotten bigger. A group of 5 people walking through the woods in the night, and suddenly it's a group of 6. And no one can figure out who this extra person might be. The stranger just kind of blends in with all of the others. The perceived security of the group suddenly becomes very uncomfortable. Nothing happened to them, and eventually this 6th person was no longer there. This isn't the experience told by one, but several groups of people have come out and said that this has happened. Over time, there have been lots of these reports. People have reported hearing someone calling from the trees, only to realize that this person is in the other direction. The voice was exactly correct, only the location was wrong. One of your friends is all the way to your south, and then you hear them calling from the north. Other folks who have run into the fleshgate say they heard someone calling to them. They were positive that this person was there in the woods with them. The trouble was that person hadn't made the trip. It might sound like their mother, who they know is not in the woods. The creature was able to mimic the voice of people. Some say the fleshgate can only mimic voices that it has heard. It can only say things that it has heard. You might hear somebody say the same thing over and over. If you ask a question, you'll get a response that makes no sense. A few witnesses have said they saw a person in the woods that shouldn't be there. This would infer that the flesh gate is able to look into our minds and dredge up images of people we know. In Kolchak the Night Stalker, Horror in the Heights, Kolchak goes up against a Rakshasa, a demon that can project the image of someone else. This sounds an awful lot like a flesh gate. It also sounds a bit like a doppelganger, also known as a double goer. Once more, a demon can take on the appearance of someone else. The doppelganger doesn't talk. You see somebody you know. They look correct, but when you ask, they don't respond. Before the real person gets back, the doppelganger will suddenly leave. People have heard someone calling for help. The person's voice sounds like someone they know. The calls are repetitive, like hearing a recording being played over and over. If you listen closely, you begin to notice it's the same request over and over, said exactly the same. On occasion, the sounds of crying have been heard, usually a small child in need of help. No words, just grief. This would be the would-be rescuer tries to follow the sound only to have them keep moving just out of sight, as if the child was moving away as fast as the rescuer was following. It's generally agreed that the flesh gates are predatory towards humans, with many people believing that they lure folks deep into the woods in order to kill them and eat them. Some also believe that the flesh gate are partially responsible for some of the missing 411 stories by David Paulides. It's generally agreed that flesh gates really like to eat humans. The legend of the ghoul can also be associated with the flesh gate. A ghoul hangs out in graveyards feeding on the dead. Once a subject has been consumed, the ghoul takes on their appearance. They don't speak, no words are ever exchanged. It's just people see folks moving around that should be dead. There is no way of knowing what all kinds of tricks a flesh gate might use on a person because nobody has ever gotten close to one and lived to tell about it. It's not like Bigfoot where we have videos and photographs to look at. People see Bigfoot and live to tell about it. There are a few flesh gate encounters reported where the witness actually got a really good look. The reports I could find had similarities, while at the same time there were lots of differences. You hear a voice coming from the woods calling you by name. You actually see this person, but they seem a bit off. If you watched the Mythbusters when Jamie and Adam put on disguises to look like each other, they looked very much the same, but their actions were not right. People seeing them were confused by who they were seeing and how that person was acting. This is how people describe encounters with flesh gates. Campers have talked about sitting around the campfire. One of their group gets up and walks away to the right. After a few seconds, they come walking back from the left. Odd, but not undoable. The person rejoins the group, only acts as if something is wrong. They just don't fit in with the rest of the people. A few minutes go by and this person gets up and suddenly leaves, only seconds before reappearing from the right once more. Many people claim hearing a flesh gate's call can be mesmerizing and difficult to resist, even when they know that the voice they're hearing isn't the person that they know. A few people have heard their own voice being repeated back to them. It's hard to recognize your own voice because you actually hear yourself speaking inside your head. When I go back and I listen to my past shows, trying to find too many mistakes so I know if I have to re-record or not, I'm always surprised by how my own voice sounds. To me, it sounds weird. What people say they hear are their own words being said back to them. It takes some time to realize the words aren't the only thing that are the same. Others with them have said that their voice was coming from two places at once, kind of like an echo, only someplace where you don't get echoes, like in the woods. This creature is said to be able to move from place to place very fast, faster than any person or animal. The voice might come from one direction and then from the opposite. They're also extremely strong, able to tear down trees and throw huge rocks, kind of like Bigfoot. Fleshgate and Wendigo stories are very similar. There's a possibility a Fleshgate began life as a human, though through some magic or a curse, they're turned into a creature that is driven to hunt humans for food. Not knowing for sure, they could also be elementals, spirits that never lived as humans. This is another situation where the best we can say is we don't know. The vast majority of encounters take place in the middle of nowhere, out in the woods or someplace far from others. A common location seems to be national or state parks. There have been a few from just outside of a person's home. If you ever are walking in the woods and it suddenly goes extremely still, no birds, no bugs making any sound, this is known as panic in the woods. All the creatures suddenly go quiet to avoid the attention of some ultimate predator. The top of the food chain has arrived and everybody else, including us, is prey. People say this is when the Fleshgate is near. This happens a lot more than we would ever know. A lot of folks will experience it only to shrug it off as being nothing. I call these folks potential victims. If you're ever in a situation where you think somebody else is in trouble, you must keep your brain working. Don't just rush into any kind of a situation without thinking about what you're doing and why. Some small kid lost in the woods calling for help. If you call to them and the sound doesn't increase or change, you might consider using a lot more caution. Try asking the child to tell you what their name is. Just about every kid will respond with a name. If you're dealing with a real live lost kid, calling them by name will alleviate a lot of their fear. They hear their name and they know that help is on the way. If, on the other hand, they just keep crying, unchanged, then it might be time to consider what you should do next before you go running off into the woods looking. If you just have to go in a group. Take others along. Stay with the others. Don't be that guy that decides I'm going to go over here and look by the typical horror movie situation. You might come back a hero, or you might not survive to tell about your encounter with the Fleshgate. I don't think any of these ghost children seen all over the world are actually spirits of kids. I think there's some kind of an evil entity trying to trick us into becoming their food. As for all these creatures that mimic children, they might all be related, or maybe they just learn from watching us. See what pushes our buttons. Those bridges where people hear crying and screaming, is this the sound of ghosts, or something trying to lure us into their domain? I hope you enjoyed tonight's show. I'm going to borrow this from Tony Merkel at the Confessionals. If you enjoyed it, share it with others. Tell people what they're missing, or simply send them a copy of the recording and let them listen. Maybe they'll discover they like the sound of my voice, that I don't understand. As Ian Punnett said, I have a face for radio and a voice for print. If you'd like to buy one of my books, you can find them at Amazon.com. If you'd like to get a t-shirt with strange things on it, you can find them at tpublic.com. Till next week, this is Chris James for Strange Things.
Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man? They say murder three. Strange things that happen here, no stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree.